might seem crazy what I'm about to say. Sunshine, she's here, you can take a break. I'm a hot air balloon that could go to space. With the air, like I don't care, baby, by the way. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do.
Everybody needs a happy place. And what could fill that purpose better than the church? Our message couldn't possibly be more positive. The word gospel means good news. And when we hear good news, what can we be other than happy? All our friends are there. Being with our friends makes us happier still. And one other thing, since everybody wants to be happy, we use a happy message to attract people to our churches. We show pictures like this one filled with happy families and happy friends. We play happy music and promise lots and lots of happiness, enough to go around. So this particular emotion becomes a defining value for any church, which makes most of us very happy, until some of us are sad. What do we do then? The church should indeed be a joyful place, a victorious place, but it must also be a healing place. And sometimes being thrown into a big old vat of happy isn't quite the medicine you or I need. Sometimes what we need is to express our sadness. We need people to listen. And frankly, the last song we want to hear is "Don't Worry, Be Happy." What does the Bible have to say about sadness? Should we teach and preach the sad passages? Or should we just stick to the happy, happy ones? And maybe the biggest question of all, what do we actually do with our sadness? Friends, if you have your Sunday School Quarterly open, I understand your confusion. The message for today was supposed to be one more from Romans, but due to its striking similarity to last week's lesson, and due to the moment you and I are living through right now, I went back to the lectionary and saw that Psalm 13 was an alternative text for today, and it just kind of jumped out at me as I read it. The more I read the passage, the more I thought, these are the words from Scripture that might do us the most good today. So let's take a look at Psalm 13 and see what it says about enduring difficult times. Psalm 13 is classified as a psalm of lament. That is, this psalm is willing to unload on God in writing. It's good to know that's okay, isn't it? Some people think it's blasphemy to yell at God, or, probably more common, they'd rather not go public with their doubts. They can be disappointed with heaven, but they'd rather not have you or I know about it. Maybe it's pride, or maybe it's the desire not to hurt your faith by displaying my doubts. Then there's that feeling that maybe these hard times are what I deserve. Maybe God's punishing me, or life is punishing me. For these or other reasons, we're likely to suppress our feelings when life grows dark. Keep a stiff upper lip and smile, even if you're dying on the inside. Oddly enough, negative emotions aren't handled that way in the Bible. The characters argue with God all the time, and God never shoots a lightning bolt at them for it. The prophets have bones to pick with God, and the Psalms have out-and-out shouting matches with the Lord. The Bible seems to indicate that, you know what? God can handle it. His skin is pretty thick. We all say God inspired the Scriptures, so he's the editor-in-chief of this book, and he never cut all these passages that throw criticism at him. The Psalms are known for emotional honesty. Maybe we should be too. Psalm 13 has been interpreted as a psalm of David's early, difficult years. When his future was up in the air, Saul, his predecessor as king, was deeply jealous of him. He'd chased David out of town and wanted him dead. You'll remember David had been anointed as the future king. He'd become a national hero after bringing down Goliath. Yet for 10 years he had to hide in forests and caves, and even among tribes who were enemies of Israel. His spirits must have been pretty low. Perhaps he wrote some of these psalms on the dark nights of his soul. Let's look at the first two verses. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I bear pain in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all day long? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? David begins with a question repeated 4 times. How long, O Lord? Have you ever asked that question? God, are you listening? When will this run of bad stuff play out? When do I get my life back? David is asking the question, but he's also giving us 4 examples of what we feel when our world falls apart. Here are some of the feelings we'd bring before God if we were to be emotionally honest. The first couple of verses are about the feeling of abandonment. As a matter of fact, it's the underlying emotion in this psalm. It's a terrible place to be. You can feel abandoned by a friend, by a spouse, by a sibling, someone who walks out of your life. Can you experience the feeling of abandonment by someone who has passed away? Of course you can. It's possible to miss someone, to mourn their absence, and be angry at them for leaving you. You can feel abandoned by a church, and yes, by God Himself. It feels like maybe He stopped blessing you. When you feel your prayers are just bouncing off the ceiling, that God is silent at the very time when you need Him most, this might be your prayer. As David cries out, how long will you hide your face from me? Imagine David having been promised a throne, having been celebrated as a hero, now forgotten and trying to survive in the woods. How long, O Lord? Is 10 years enough? Suffering is an investment that collects interest over time. Andrew Fuller said, it's not always during the sharpest trials, but the longest, when we're most in danger of fainting. This is about days and months and years passing, whittling away at our faith. Second, he asks, how long must I bear pain in my soul and sorrow in my heart? It sounds a lot like depression. We all know that's something that is rampant in the modern world. Most of us have had at least some experience with depression. There are a number of important symptoms, but one of the most common is a loss of desire for things that would normally bring us pleasure. A fine meal, a good book, seeing a friend. There's a loss of energy and enthusiasm. And when we're depressed, we also tend to retreat to a hiding place deep within ourselves. And of course, that makes things worse. Friends are concerned, they want to help, but we want to be left alone. Some people, we need to understand, are more prone to depression just by genetics than others. When we feel pain in the soul and sorrow in the heart, it's a good time to pray, as David does here. But also it's important to seek help and counsel. Some of the deepest and most fruitful Christian leaders have struggled with depression, so we shouldn't think it makes a negative statement about our faith. Finally, David asks, how long shall my enemy be exalted over me? We don't talk much about enemies these days. Maybe nobody's thrown a spear at you lately or had their army hunt you down through the woods and in caves. But we do have our conflicts. We deal with difficult people. Maybe we feel resentment towards someone else who's succeeding more than they should. And why does God seem to bless all the wrong people? It seems as if He watches the rat race too often and lets the rats win. Why did Saul remain king so long? Why do bad people have so much power in this world? How long, O Lord? So the first section of this psalm showed the symptoms of our negative emotions. We might experience feelings of abandonment, of depression, or of resentment. This second section suggests the medicine for melancholy. David is going to offer 3 prescriptions here, but the underlying solution to all of these is prayer, honest prayer. Again, expert medical advice is a gift from God too, but David is going to talk about spiritual remedies in this psalm. In these first 2 verses, we saw how David started right where he was. He expressed his confusion, his dark feelings, even his anger and bitterness. But something amazing happens when we take all that to God. and the Psalms bear testimony to it over and over. When we approach God with our scattered emotions, a more rational outlook begins to steal in. In the face of standing before Him with our complaints, we begin to get a new perspective. Do you remember when you were a child and there were monsters in your bedroom closet? Your mom or dad would come in, turn on the light, and show you what was real and what wasn't. God does that for His children when we tell Him about the monsters in our closets. Let's see how David has that kind of divine experience in these 3 verses. Consider me and answer me, O Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep the sleep of death, and my enemy will say, I have prevailed. My foes will rejoice because I am shaken. David's first request is, consider me, God. The word consider is often translated as see. See me, God. Look upon me. It's a way of asking God to attend to you, to hear your prayer. This is like the child waking in the night and calling for a parent. It's not a lament or a complaint, as in the first verses. Now it's a simple cry for help. Consider me, God. Second, coupled with that one is the request to answer me, O Lord my God. Don't just consider me, but answer my prayers. Again, it's simple, but so profound, and it's all about the attitude. Notice how God is addressed here. O Lord my God. This is passionate. Only this sentence in the psalm is followed by an exclamation point. We come to a point of desperation, of spiritual emptiness, and God is absent without leave. Yet in the midst of this, we send our passionate, believing prayers toward heaven. In those moments, when life has turned sour but faith soldiers on, when there seems to be no rational reason to trust God, but we choose to trust Him anyway, at those very moments in time, God looks upon us and says, this is my child, living up to all my hopes and plans. And we come out on the other side with new wisdom and strength we could never have gained otherwise. The question is, will faith become our refuge when times grow this tough? Or will we discard our faith like an old tool that stopped working? A great many psalms work like this one, beginning with a storm, a cry for help, then moving through the elements of prayer, and finishing out with praise and thanksgiving. That's why the Psalms are such useful guides to us. They're like emotional road maps for travel in all seasons of life. This one begins, How long, O Lord? And somehow, within 6 verses, the psalmist has found his way to that sunnier, positive place. Let's read the closing section. But I trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because He has dealt bountifully with me. The first word here, but, is, let's say, a load-bearing word. It carries the weight of all that's gone before in this psalm, and it transitions us from despair toward hope, from eyes cast down to eyes full of light, just as David has said. And where did that turning point come from? I trusted in your steadfast love. Trust, a basic thing and a powerful thing. In financial terms, a trust is an arrangement of shifting something valuable to another party for a purpose. You set up a trust for after you're gone. Our church has trusts that were set up generations ago to provide funding for missions and other things, also known as endowments. They were people in our church family who trusted in us in a powerful way that would bear fruit long beyond their time. David says, I trusted in your steadfast love. In other words, he banked his soul on the love of God, the idea that God had purpose for him and that he would work it out. Of course, Saul did fail to kill him, and David did become king. God proved worthy of that trust. David speaks in these verses of rejoicing and singing to God. This gives us another clue for recovering from the depths of our desperation. Worship brings us into His presence. The joy and the divine perspective of it are healthy in every way. So we place our trust in God. We worship. And one final thing, always so important in the story of Israelites, these final words, because He has dealt bountifully with me. One of the greatest favors we can do for ourselves is to take a walk through the past, Too easily we forget all the good things God has done. When we're depressed, when we're discouraged, the moment is magnified until it dwarfs everything else. Everything is out of proportion. Revisiting what God has done for us in ages past is an eye-opener. He's never failed us yet. Is he likely to fail us now? The Israelites placed a lot of stock in their history. They worked to remember that they were a called people, a covenant people, and that God always paid off their trust. He never deserted them, even when they most deserved it. David's mentor was a prophet named Samuel. In 1 Samuel 7:12, God had brought a great victory to Israel. Samuel set a great stone in place and called it Ebenezer, because he said, "Thus far the Lord has helped us." In that old hymn, "Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing," that's why we have the line that says, "Here I raise my Ebenezer." We sing it all the time with no clue what it means, right? Here's what it means. We lift up a stone of memory. We need to put up a rock here or there in our lives. You can name it anything you want. It doesn't have to be Ebenezer. You could call it Fred or Maybelline. Better yet, you can name it God answered this prayer on this date, or God was good to me in this way. We need to be reminded because we live too much in the moment. So then, the next time we ask, "How long, O Lord?" He might answer and say, "Would you like to know how long since I've blessed you? It hasn't been as long as you think." Still, we know the tough moments are in store. We're only human, and struggles are just part of the job description. The next time you come to that low place in the road, remember this psalm and the gracious, faithful God who inspired it. Thanks for listening.